The PWHL playoffs have officially started, and unfortunately, I guess if you're a Minnesota fan, we have to talk about Britta behaving badly. All that and much, much more coming up on the Women's Hockey Report.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Happy Saturday morning, women's hockey fans. Welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network and the Locked On NHL channel, where we bring you your favorite sport every Saturday. My name is Erica L. Ayala. I am here alongside Rachel Donner. We want to let you know that today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Yes, we are going to talk about the playoffs. Yes, we are going to talk about the suspension, but first it's the vibe check. Rachel, how you feeling?
Listen, when we did our preview, you asked who's going to be a standout player. And, I kind of threw out there Micaela Cava, right?
You did.
Guess who scored in game 2 for Minnesota in a very pivotal moment to really establish Minnesota's game. So
yes, we will get into that. But my vibes right now outside of the PWHL, I just had my birthday, so I'm having a good time, feeling great about it.
Happy belated.
Thank you. The WNBA is getting moving here. So, and yes, we had Cava on our thumbnail for the last episode because you definitely called that out. I also, if we're talking about the PWHL vibe check, I'm super excited for Shiann Darkangelo, who is someone I've always advocated for, ride or die OG of my tenure in women's hockey, also getting on the board. But again, we'll talk about all of that. But perhaps some of the biggest news came between games 1 and 2 of that Minnesota-Toronto series, Rachel. And once again, Britta Curl in the mix.
Yeah, it's just so unfortunate, pulling focus from what should be a tremendous playoff semifinal series here between these two teams. And it's really frustrating because obviously we know she got a 5 in a game for elbowing Renata Faust in game 1. And it was a 1-game suspension. And that's exactly what I expected the league to put down because she's already had 2 suspensions this season that were each 1 game. In January, there was a stick to the head. And in March, there was that elbow against Megan Carter, right? And the league only chose to suspend her for 1 game for each of those. And as we all know, we can pull this from the NHL in terms of suspensions, and there are different rules for the playoffs than there are for the regular season. Those suspensions always get cut down, right? So what were they going to do? They can't cut down from 1. So they had to keep it at 1. Meanwhile, they're not considering the compound incidents here. And it's infuriating to me if you can't tell.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this comes after we talked on last episode about Hillary Knight and the Boston Fleet. Now, in fairness, they were asked, but also talking about, that players need to be protected. And then here we have a player, like you mentioned, that has a history of these things. And, we talked about it also coming out of international play. Was Curl someone that was kind of instigating or the target of some very specific players that play for Hockey Canada? So it is extremely unfortunate. There's one of those players in every league. You think of the Draymond Greens. I just don't understand how people still can root for a Brad Marchand who is out there licking people's faces. That's so gross to me. But, I guess everyone has their type. But either way, maybe Draymond Green. Are we at Draymond Green, Brad Marchand level? I don't know. But it's pretty. It's like you said, the compound effect is pretty egregious here. And you put your team in a bad spot in a playoff race, by having to serve that suspension. So I just wonder if there's just overall maybe just a little bit more of a calculated risk, body awareness that Britta can bring to her game. I don't know. I mean, that's just putting it in the kindest, nicest, lightest form of the conversation.
Well, yeah. And what's so weird to me is that Ken Klee, first of all, defended her, which not great, I don't think, again, given the history there. But also, I think secondarily, Minnesota won game 2 without her.
Mm,
And I, I think that's an important note to make, that this team is fine without her and
mm,
has a lot of offensive weapons and can make really good plays, can have a successful power play
mm.
without her on the ice. And, can they do it, for a sustained period over the course of a playoffs? Honest question, really good point. However, I just don't think that taking her away from multiple games, given the history and the track record, is an undue burden for the Minnesota Frost.
I mean, and again, it's just something that is it something long term that is going to help or hinder this team? And you have expansion, so these are decisions that all players are under the scrutiny of. But if you start, if you've got a type, right, or this is just, again, hate having to talk about it. Listen, you can talk about how hockey is being regulated a little bit different at all levels, and that's sure a conversation if you want to have it. And I mean, hits to the head, we're just seeing across sports. You got to get used to it. That's how the games are being called. You don't need to, even if you do make contact, because there are people that are different heights, or you're kind of reaching
Right.
and squatting, and so you end up at different levels. I could totally see, especially how that play went down. You could maybe make an argument for that, but I would say, when you follow through, right? When you follow through on something like that, and again, you have had an issue with, and it's not like Britta Curl, right? We had Lee Stecklein talking about how do you manage knowing that your height could be a disadvantage, right? It's a liability when you're playing against players who you are above the average height. That's not what Britta Curl is dealing with, right?
No.
So there has to be something where, if you truly want to be an elite level athlete, you have to understand how the game is being called. Even if you wanted to kind of, say, oh, intent, blah, 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 speed of the game, blah, blah, blah. There's responsibility.
Yeah. And when you raise your elbow like that and in a very clear motion, like, what other option is there but to call that? And if
Yeah.
they didn't, it would have been even worse.
Yeah, absolutely. We love folks chiming in on the comments. Agreed on all of this regarding Curl. It is not a hockey play, and she should be done. And his defense, quotes, was garbage, talking about Klee there. So, I mean, yeah, I feel like we did what we needed to do with that, because there's definitely playoff hockey, and that's what we're
Yes.
all excited about here. But you mentioned it, Rachel. It's a split series, or a tied series, I guess we should say, at the time. So the Minnesota-Toronto series has already seen game 2. We have game 2 coming up on Sunday for the other series. But let's stick with Minnesota. What were some of your takeaways in game 1? And then we'll talk about game 2.
Yeah, game 2, I think, or sorry, game 1, I think that Toronto came out kind of guns a-blazing in that game. Obviously, we saw Julia Gosling 2 goals in the second period, one of which on the power play. And we know Toronto's power play is very good. And, we had mentioned that Minnesota doesn't give up power plays very often,
Right.
but Toronto is just the team to be able to capitalize on them.
Right.
And they were able to do that. And I thought we saw some pretty solid goaltending on either end in that game for sure. I think it was just really the resiliency of Minnesota that came through in the second game. Like, this is a championship team. We saw what they did to Boston, like dismantling them recently. Like, Minnesota was not going to be down after game one. That is for sure.
No, and again, we kind of alluded to that this is a team that we've seen their ring design, their banner's already up, and their whole message, to summarize last year going into the playoffs was like win one game, right? Just focus on the task at hand, stay the course. And, I think there are two teams in the playoffs. We'll get into the next series in a little bit that they understand that urgency because of how their regular season went. And that's really interesting because it's not to say that a team that has been at the top of the table like a Montreal or a Toronto, that they don't understand that, but there's a different level, right? And that desperation, it hits a little different, Rachel, right? And I think that also being able to say, hey, we know what it takes to win a championship, that's also very important. And so I think what we saw Minnesota be able to do in game two is we're in game one where we saw that it was definitely Toronto that was had the lion's share of shots on goal, 37-26. And they got doubled up in the first frame alone, Minnesota, on shots on goal. So the opportunities towards the net changed a lot, Rachel, I think, in the second game, more of a focus to give yourself opportunities, right? To give yourself every opportunity. We used to hear that. We still hear that with the Seattle Kraken. I host Locked On Kraken, and the Kraken say, we give players every opportunity to be successful. Well, you have to give yourself every opportunity to be successful. And in hockey, that means you got to get shots up. So, shots definitely closer, still in favor of the Scepters, but only, a 5-shot swing. But then also, and we've talked about this before, Minnesota having a defense core that can activate on offense. And we saw that a few times over when it came to the scoring for Minnesota in game two.
Yeah. And of course, like we're in Lee Stecklein's world, obviously here, with her getting those 2 goals, one of which was on the power play in game two. I think game two was interesting to me for a couple of reasons, because I really think it showed what both teams are good at, right? But Minnesota just comes out in the end, because you saw, Toronto take that early lead, right? Which they did in game one. They do it again in game two, but Minnesota comes out in the second period and takes a lead. Toronto gets close to getting, they get back into it, right? Because they can do that. They have the weapons to do that. And they get contributions from Savannah Harmon, from Allie Monroe.
Yep.
And that may not have been who you expected to come through for Toronto, but they did. And then, Minnesota finds a way to put it away in the third, despite the fact that they were outshot 13-4 in the period.
Right.
Minnesota is the one that's able to put the puck in the net.
That's right. Sophie Jakes gets a goal and also an assist in that frame. And we've talked about this before, even in the last game of the regular season. Is that a game that Minnesota absolutely should have won? I mean, you could argue that one way or another, but they were opportunistic where Boston maybe wasn't. They capitalize on the mistakes. They see the space on the ice and they attack. And that is because they have speed. They have skill, they have high IQ, and you can see that they are very strategic. They don't second guess, think double, they're not overthinking things when they find those seams, and that's what makes them dangerous.
Yeah, and Kendall Coyne-Schofield had some issues during that game, or wasn't sure, and so her ice time was down to only 14 minutes in that game, and everybody else stepped up. And I think that's, a hallmark of a championship game. She did return to the game, obviously, but I think that, it's an important note for the Minnesota Frost.
Absolutely. Next player up. That is definitely the mentality that you have to have in the postseason. We're going to step aside just for a wee little break here, but we have plenty of hockey to talk about, and that is coming up on the Women's Hockey Report. And Rachel, we know that we have so many amazing sponsors here, but you're going to tell us right now about Amazon Fire TV.
Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? You can turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you are ready to play. You can dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. And if you've ever wanted to try out Xbox games without that big upfront investment in a console, Fire TV Stick 4K can be that low pressure way to start exploring. So head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass, Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen.
And today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report also brought to you by our friends at Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. So stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. As a small business owner, I know the things that can happen when you don't hire the right person, when you don't have candidates that are really meeting as many of the qualifications as you're trying to find. And so having something like Indeed speed up that hiring process is super important. And now you can speed up that process, as I just mentioned, with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show, the Women's Hockey Report, by saying you heard about Indeed right here. Terms and conditions apply. If you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. All right. Thanks as always for joining us here on the Women's Hockey Report every Saturday. This is a special episode because it's live, Rachel. We knew that there was a game Friday. We just talked about that series between Minnesota and Toronto, and we didn't want to skimp out. We wanted to make sure we were talking about everything. So we talked about that first series, already 2 games in the bag, but we have another series. The second semifinal, of course, that is Montreal picking and pointing out their opponent on the playground in the Ottawa Charge, and 1 game in. But how's it going on that side of the bracket?
Of course, Ottawa won game 1, 3-2 on Thursday. And I think for me, there are 2 big takeaways from that game. The first off is how good a job Ottawa did defensively. And that's something that they're very good at, but aren't often 100% consistent at. But I felt like they did a pretty remarkable job all game in terms of doing things like driving Montreal to the outside when they needed to. They used the physicality that they are known for in order to do that. And so I think that was really good.
Yeah.
And
go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, like, as a result, my other point is that Montreal was only able to score on the power play in that game. They were not able to score at 5-on-5, which, great for the Montreal power play, but also, if you can't score at 5-on-5, like, your chances of winning the game go down.
Oh, for sure. And that's something that Montreal is going to want to figure out here. On the one hand, you do need special teams, right? And we've already talked about the other series, how that's a way to really catch up, swell the lead, all of those things. You need that. And if you can't score 5-on-5, I mean, that's the game, right? Everything else are the bonuses or the penalties in the game. So, but again, that goes back to the structure of Ottawa. It's not just like, I love that you said that this is a team that can put out that defensive performance. Consistency has been what we have been screaming to the interwebs about the Toronto Charge all season long. But there was also a level of focus, a level of determination and confidence that was uniform. And I'm not here to say that I'm in the Ottawa Charge locker room or dressing room, depending on where you are in the world, But what I can say is that you can see just that difference, and it might be slight, but it is a resound difference in how they're speaking, and how they're focused. For me, Rachel, that's the big takeaway. And I think what you alluded to on 5-on-5 is a part of that, playing as a full unit, truly
Yeah.
seeing it as a game, as a mission where you have to do that. And I mean, yeah, these are professional hockey players. They should know that. And sometimes you just hit another level, right, in your mentality. And I think that's what Ottawa was able to do.
Right. And I think, when you look at the offensive side of things for Ottawa in this game, you get a goal from the captain, Brianne Jenner,
Yep.
setting the tone, scoring the first goal of the game, hugely important. Also on the power play, which, has had mixed results for Ottawa over the course of this season. So that was an extremely important element to that game. Then I think you got, at the back end of the game-winning goal from Shiann Darkangelo, the veteran, providing that presence and backstopping them to that victory. Like, I just think the bookends of the goals for Ottawa in that game were hugely important and something that can carry them through to the next game.
And I think also I would point out Gwyneth Philips. This is someone who
Mhm.
really we were high on, coming again from some of the international play, specifically with the rivalry series, how Gwyneth Philips showed up, showed out, and people in media at these games, or at the playoff game and right before we started, to end or I should say to end the regular season, of course, people asking about Gwyneth Philips, how was she prepared for this, all of these things. And I mean, it's what we heard when we were in Raleigh, North Carolina, right? I mean, in
Yep.
summary, she's a gamer. We also heard from Gwyneth herself, and it's about, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. And I love that mentality. I love that attitude. It is unfortunate that Emrance Mashmeyer has gone down with an injury towards the back end of the season for Ottawa. I mean, that's an understatement. And Gwyneth
Oh,
Phillips.
yeah. Now, listen, you don't think that the question in the back of my head for the past 3 weeks hasn't been, in an expansion draft, if you get to protect one goalie, Ottawa, who is it? Who
Mm,
is it?
that's
Because I don't want to have to answer that question
nope.
for Ottawa management. I mean, because you almost have to say that it's Phillips at this point, but like, to not protect Mashmeyer seems absolutely bonkers. So that's going to be a whole thing we're going to talk about eventually,
Yeah.
but that is the thing swirling in the back of my brain as these
Yeah.
playoffs continue.
Or to put a spin on that, right? These teams were asked to basically put a franchise tag on not just one player. So in the WNBA, in a lot of leagues, you have a quote unquote franchise player. They're just as it
Mhm.
sounds, the player that you are building a foundation around. You lock them into a contract, and they are going to be with your team. We saw that the teams had to do that. They picked 3 players effectively to lock into long-term contracts. And I think that was done for the marketing of it all. They're Olympians, right? All the Olympians here. But now that there's expansion coming, to your point, I think the assumption was that the Olympians were going to rise to the top, and in a very a wide gap in margin. And I don't know that that's exactly what's necessarily happening in certain specific roles. And it's what we've been saying about women's hockey for a while. It's that we obviously have to look beyond just national team members or people who are perennial national team members, because that's how other women's hockey leagues have been able to exist, including now the PWHL. So yes, expansion always throws a wrinkle, and it's
Yeah.
something that we've been talking about in the WNBA. But when you have multiple expansion teams coming in, and this is the first bite at the expansion apple for the PWHL, excuse me, that's a lot of disruption. I do not envy what general managers are going to have to do in just a few weeks here, Rachel.
Yeah, I know.
Assuming
I
things are
know, but
for the draft.
yeah, and it just, this one particular position and role is what's top of mind for
Yeah.
me here. But circling it back to the series, I think that Montreal is going to have some similar difficult questions.
Yeah.
And, obviously we're one game into this series. Anything can happen. Montreal is an unbelievable hockey team. So I am never going to count them out. But I do think that they're going to have to really like adjust their game a little bit here in order to get some quality chances past Phillips, because you look at the way this game went from a flow perspective, and Montreal got the lion's share of the chances in the first period and the second period.
Too, yeah.
And yet, Ottawa was still in a position to win the game going into that third period. And then Ottawa turns the tables a little bit. I think just in terms of the eye test and the numbers bear it out in terms of the shot totals, Ottawa controlled a very significant portion of that third period. That's not something, Montreal should get used to. Like, they're going to have to know how to finish a game out against this Ottawa team that's going to play hard.
And you mentioned the eye test. I think in watching this game, what stood out to me, and it was extremely frustrating to watch at times, Ottawa, it looked like Ottawa was just shooting into skates, shooting into bodies. And I think there's a part of that you put on the Charge. How do you use east-west as much as you use north-south, especially knowing that there's extra width in these ice rinks that we're going to see in Canada? So I do want to say that the Charge has to do a better job. And I think they did, right, of opening up the ice, being a little less direct, and getting especially René Desbiens to move, left, right in the crease. I will say that. However, I think also there were plenty of times where it was the positioning of Montreal that was the bugaboo, getting down to the ice, blocking shots, getting a stick into passing lanes. And so to your point, I think that they were able to do that effectively early in the game. And they need to be able to hunker down. Now, that's a tough way to play. It's a hard way to play. And it goes back to the other series that we were talking about a little bit. When we were talking about Ottawa earlier, you have to commit to playing that throughout the full game. You can't relent, especially in the playoffs.
Right. And Ottawa's used to playing desperate, to be fair. And they did. And it came through for them. And, whether they can do that in a sustained series, that's the big question for them. And that's the test. Can they be consistent?
And what I liked, whether it was Darkangelo's interview on the ice, got to see the fireman or the firefighter cap in the locker room, that presentation, putting the puck up on the puck board. This is a team that is locked in. It's basically they're on some, we ain't done nothing yet. We ain't done nothing yet. We haven't won a series. We haven't arrived at the finals. We haven't won a championship. And they know that there's more work to be done. They'll obviously take the win. And the only way you win a series, the only way you win a championship is by building off of the opportunities for success. Because we know Montreal is watching film. We know that they are going to make some adjustments and are going to be more steadfast in certain areas. I do want to say one other thing that I thought was interesting, and I respected Carla McLeod and how she handled it. Everyone talking about, hey, we even did it right on this episode, on last episode. Yep. Montreal picked you. We saw how that worked last year. What are your thoughts about that? Carla McLeod was like, listen, they did what they were asked to do, and they picked us. That's it. That's a storyline for y'all. We're not talking about it. We have to win these games. And I respected that. Now, is that really, 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 really how the players feel? I mean, I have my doubts. I
don't think so either. Right. But I think it's fun, especially because of, again, how last year went. I think that it makes the PWHL, I think, that much more of an exciting league, right? Where you have elements like this, where you add to the mix.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And again, what happens in the locker room when the cameras aren't in there? I wouldn't be surprised if some of that ekes into there, or, you keep your whiteboard material. But I like that Carla is like, I'm taking control of this. My players are not touching that. This is how our team is approaching it, and it's done. Like, you can ask her about it again. I doubt she's going to give a different answer. She's like, we're not focused on that. And I respect it, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who they were going to play. In order for them to be where they want to be at the end of the season, they have to win games. That's it. Period.
That's an excellent note to end on for that discussion.
Period. But okay, looking ahead, of course, things pick up tomorrow, Sunday, for the PWHL and the playoff schedule. Both series will be in action, starting with the Ottawa Montreal series. That will be game 2, Sunday, May 11th, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Once again, Montreal hosting. Ooh, that place was so quiet after game 1. And so we're at game 3 already in the Toronto, Minnesota series, Rachel, which means that we now switch from Toronto to the Twin Cities Xcel Energy Center, where Toronto will be at Minnesota. That's going to be at 5 p.m. Central Time. I love how they did Central Time. I'm like, absolutely. Let's not always work under the East Coast gaze. I say that as someone who was raised in New York and now lives in Central Time. So, but that will be 6 p.m. Eastern for those who need a decipher. So that will be exciting. And of course, we will talk about that on next week's Women's Hockey Report. But we have a few other things to wrap up when it comes to the PWHL and specifically the draft. No, we haven't gotten more information from the league yet, but we do know that the window to declare for the draft has closed. And Rachel, you picked up some trends that we will talk about coming up on the Women's Hockey Report. Today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, we know the playoffs are in action. PWHL, of course, we just talked about it. NHL, NBA, everything in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, momentum shifts, suspensions like we talked about, and other can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning goal or an overtime drama, there's never a better time to get in on the action. And the great thing about FanDuel is that they are putting some respect on the women's sports, including the PWHL. Probably hear about FanDuel and PWHL as you're watching the games. Here we can see these are the odds to win the Walter Cup there. And so we'll see, are the odds makers right? Or will some of these teams be able to crack through and make believers of the field? You can also check out, I love checking out future bets. You can look at WNBA odds, Stanley Cup odds, all of that. And the great thing is that if you are new to FanDuel, you can get a $200 bonus if your first $5 bet hits. And again, future bets is a great way to do that. And so make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA, and of course, the PWHL and us here at the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Rachel, PWHL playoffs in action. Everyone getting a little bit of rest today before both series pick up tomorrow. We do know there are 2 expansion teams coming in, but what we don't know is what the expansion draft will look like. Although we are expecting that it will be before the entry draft. So again, that's a handful of weeks now that we're talking about, Rachel. It's already April. Hello. It's May 10th. I should know. I'm a May tourist, but it's May 10th here. So time's a ticking. But there is something very concrete that we know about the entry draft, and that is who has officially declared.
Yeah, we don't have a complete list that has been released by the league. We know based on, players who have said that they have declared here. And obviously, one of the biggest names is Casey O'Brien from Wisconsin, who has declared, I think the big story around this is who did not declare and who said that they're going to go back to their NCAA hockey teams. And the biggest name is Abbey Murphy, who will be returning to the University of Minnesota. She has that extra year of eligibility because of the Olympic year and COVID and all of that. And she is choosing to take advantage of that and return to the Gophers. So that is a big name that will not be in this entry draft. A couple other names that we know now, Lacey Eden and Marianne Picard of Wisconsin will not be in the PWHL draft this year. Lacey Eden, we know from the national team, of course. And so I think, there's a few big names that will not be in this draft. And I think there is a conversation about this year's entry draft and it being a slightly weaker draft. Now, obviously, year one, it's everybody. So it's going to be a little bit different. But I think, there is some truth to that here.
I think also everything is so new. And then again, you add the wrinkle of expansion. You add that there are some players that still can utilize that extra eligibility.
Yep.
And that's just a year on top of, this is notwithstanding if players have redshirted or if they stepped away for international time. So, I mean, we see that in the WNBA, that last crop for the W is now through. But with women's hockey, for a little bit, there's been a lot of uncertainty. And I think that in some ways, maybe a part of the narrative, how big or what percentage, is that this is still a growing league. It's successful in a lot of ways that other leagues have not been. And, you still got to figure out as you're a player that's in college, playing in college, what part of that transition is going to work for you, especially now that we're adding markets like on the state side, Seattle, which
right.
You have to think about cost of living and things of that nature. So, I think we're still very new, I guess is in summary, what I'm saying here. We're still very new to the process and there's more newness being added. So, I don't know that it's an indictment one way or another. And at the end of the day, similarly to what Carla McLeod was saying about picking, this is something that we talk about in media, but the bare bones of it is an athlete has to do what's going to be best for them and their family.
Absolutely. And I think that it's a very weird situation, again, with that extra year of eligibility that you mentioned, the centralization versus no centralization discussion for the national teams, how all of that works. So I do not think it's a ding on the league at all. It's definitely circumstantial. I think this will give more international players a chance to get drafted in this one. I think that's going to be the big story out of this particular draft for the PWHL, which is a good thing. I think getting more international players outside of North America involved in the league is always going to be good for the league and for women's hockey around the world as a whole. And I also think it's going to make the 2026 draft absolutely bonkers because we'll have those names that I just mentioned, including Abbey Murphy. Plus, we're going to add names like Tessa Janicki, Caroline Harvey, maybe Layla Edwards. Like, who knows? Like that draft. Listen, it is going to be a whole time.
Oh, absolutely. And again, things like the gold plan, how that plays into effect, knowing that there's two more teams in the mix, everyone jockeying for positioning to win a championship. But if you're not going to be in that position, you definitely want to be in a position to get a high draft pick, to your point. And you alluded to this again, but just want to hit this point hard that next year, now this is not just for the draft or for the NCAA, but also the PWHL. We know that it's an Olympic year, and how that changes things is going to be interesting to see what people prioritize, if they feel or they just choose not to kind of quote unquote do it all. Because I'm here to tell you, as someone who covers women's basketball, the grind is a lot for an athlete who happens to be an Olympian playing for a very competitive NCAA team and is considering going into the pros. There's no time in the W. There's a little bit more of a reprieve on the college hockey side, but again, it's just so new. So we will keep up with that. We will be scouring the interwebs to see if anyone's given away little nuggets on what they're thinking, why they made one decision or another. But we know that you are going to decide to lock into the PWHL playoffs tomorrow for the doubleheader. And we have to give a shout out to our friends at Black Girl Hockey Club that are having a playoff watch party. They're going to be tapped in for Montreal Victoire versus Ottawa Charge. You can check out the Black Girl Hockey Club YouTube channel, 7 p.m. Eastern time. So definitely check that out. And I also just want to mention something that came across our desk, so to speak. And the Hockey for All award recipient, Maureen Murphy, announced that she is going to be partnering with the Access Psychology Foundation to provide free mental health training for teachers and faculty at underserved schools across the United States. Now, listen, schools are under scrutiny here with all of the new budgets happening. I know that's really boring stuff unless you're someone like me who studied political science. And I think it's always interesting when we see athletes being able to step in there about causes that are important to them. So stick taps to Maureen Murphy, and we will see her and Montreal see what they can do in game 2 of their series. But for Rachel Donner, Erica L. Ayala here. And if you enjoy the men's hockey, then make sure you're also checking out Locked On NHL Game Night on this very YouTube channel, every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. You can find NHL Game Night on the Locked On NHL YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want your women's hockey specific, make sure to follow us on TikTok at women's_hockey_report. And we will catch you next week. Thanks so much for joining or tapping into our first ever live show. And we will be back next week. All right. Peace out, everybody. Enjoy the games.